Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
Hello, and welcome back to the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and today we have a very special guest. Her name is Rachelle Robinette, and she is an herbalist and the author of the forthcoming book, Naturally, The Herbalist Guide to Health and Transformation. And Rachelle, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Nice. Well, I have been involved with herbs for about 40 years, and I love to hear fresh perspectives, and a new book comes out is always exciting. So I'd like to hear a little bit from you. What brings you here?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I love to hear that you've been working with the plants for 40 years. That's incredible. And it reminds me of the fact that, herbalism is a part of so many of our lives already, and so many of us don't realize that. It's
Right.
in kitchens, it's in the backyard, it's at the coffee shop, it's at the grocery store, it's all around us. So, I think we're all probably practicing herbalism in one way or another,
One
but
way or another, for sure.
yeah. And realizing that, and waking up to that, as you well know, is life-changing and health changing. It's transformational to realize that we're surrounded by opportunities to be well, to be better, to be more vital, and we're surrounded by natural medicine. So
I
I
think that the food aspect of health is one of the most overlooked and important pieces. And you drive down the road and you see fast food place after fast food place, and then you find some little cornered produce stand, and that's where food actually is. And
mm,
it's kind of crazy. We're kind of backwards with all of that.
It's true. It's really gotten to that point. It's very true. And, something that your listeners are probably very well aware of, but I like to remind people who are less familiar with herbalism, that herbalists will always start with food.
Mhm.
It is our first medicine. And if we can be well with our food, much of which is also, herbal, you think of blueberries or
Yeah.
rosemary or any of these culinary
Any
herbs.
spice, vegetable, or fruit is going to be an herb. I always say the definition of an herb is a useful plant.
That's
And,
great.
you know, I
That's
make
perfect.
topical skin products with them and elixirs and things. And if I put it in there and it came from a plant, it's an herb.
That's so true. It's so true. And if we can use food to reach a state of, health and wellness and not need herbs as medicine on top of that, any herbalist will send you off with that, quote unquote protocol. The goal is not to
Absolutely.
have, everybody taking a bunch of herbs as medicine if we don't need them. So
You go
yeah,
to a
we always start with
Chinese doctor and they'll give you a bowl of soup as a prescription, and you got to go to the Chinese pharmacy and they pull out all the parts and pieces and they go, here you go make your soup.
exactly. I love that. I love that. Yeah, so food is critical for sure, for sure. And
How did you get into this? I have a story how I found my way to looking at natural medicine, but what got you to this? Where did you come from?
yeah. Well, I came from a farm in the Pacific Northwest.
That makes it easy.
The journey wasn't linear exactly. I mean, in some ways it was. I grew up on that farm and I was surrounded by nature. We had an enormous garden. My dad was an anesthesiologist, so I was exposed to Western medicine and surgery and bodies and all of the sort of concepts of health from that perspective. And then my mom is a functional health practitioner
Yeah.
still. So I had this sort of balance of both. I started taking supplements and drinking teas and using essential oils very, very young.
Nice.
But
Kind of
of
had it
course,
built in a little bit to some degree.
it's very built in. I never intended to make it my career. I went straight from that farm to New York City to work in fashion.
Wow. Wow. What a juxtaposition there, dichotomy.
It was intentionally. I wanted nothing to do with dirt for a
Nice.
long time. That said, my personal study and my personal practice of all of these things, which, all of these things is herbalism, um, never stopped from the time I was young. I mean, I was in junior high or elementary school, maybe I was doing a report on traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture.
Nice.
I was studying every healing tradition that I could get my hands on from the time that I was very young, mostly because I was fascinated with the slightly more philosophical perspective of this sort of work, which is, how does what we take in through our senses affect our experience of being alive?
Mm.
Sights, sounds, thoughts, light, of course, food, of course, herbs. So I was really interested in sort of that root cause, if you will, of how our states change, how our health changes, how our mind changes. So I studied everything I could get my hands on. And even when I was working in fashion, I was raw vegan. I was using my vacation days to go to Peru to do
Nice.
ayahuasca. So,
Nice. Nice.
so I was always doing it, just not always professionally.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I suspect you found that the answer was a lot more ways than anybody thinks,
Exactly, exactly. And the answer that I found was it's herbalism because herbalism is all of this.
right?
It is that holistic. It is about nutrition and fitness and medicine and mental health and spirituality and community. As you well know, it is not just plants as medicine. It is the whole human and the whole environment. We are
100%.
nature. Nature is,
And it's infinite. You'll never be able to learn it all because it's so regional. And you go from one place to the next, and their understandings and uses of the same plants, even in some cases, are so different. And the differences of the plants grown in one region to another can be so different. That's when I discovered that, I'm like, ah, cool, I found my life's path because I'll never get to the end of the road.
I love that. Yeah, I felt the same way. It's like I can marry this because it will continue to evolve and evolve and evolve. And, we'll continue to discover more plants and we'll continue to discover more about the plants that we have already discovered and more about our bodies, and our bodies will change. It is fascinating and it is endless for those who want to,
And
pursue it.
today is such an exciting time to be in because when I started this, there wasn't computers, there wasn't internet, and I found information in old books from the used bookstore, and that's where I began my journey. And there was a handful of new books, but you read. There was no AI, there was no Wikipedia, there was no Google, there wasn't any of that. And you read and you tried and you
Yeah.
met people and talked. And that
Yeah.
was kind of I would never want to learn any other way
Mm.
because I learned in a way that really stuck to me by just, trying and all that. But nowadays, if I want to learn something, look up a recipe, I get a head start that takes me probably about 5 books of not having to read to get to. So we get at least a lot of, it's an exciting time to be learning today.
It is exciting. And I had the internet, when I was studying these things, but the wellness industry didn't exist in the way that it exists now. And so, when I started, I was kind of connecting a lot of dots from sort of the herbalism world and then the biohacking sort of bodybuilding world. They were very early to a lot of the supplements and things that are, popular now. Creatine is a perfect example.
Sure.
I was in those like chat rooms and things, and it's like they're talking about similar things that the herbalists are talking about, and like this
Right.
is starting to become popular. And one of the other things that I tried to do early on, and that I definitely still do intentionally, is to present herbalism in a way that is as accessible as possible to as wide an audience as possible. Because I think if you love herbalism or you're an herbalist, like you get it, the vibe, the look and feel,
Sure.
it has a distinct kind of brand, if you will. And I wanted to appeal to and excite, again, as many people as possible, and kind of wake up the realization that this is not fringe. It is not esoteric. It is not unscientific. It is so relevant and so important for modern life, even modern urban life.
Oh,
It can be
absolutely.
cool, it can be sexy. It is
Be
very
whatever you want it to be, baby.
exactly. So yeah, yeah, that
So
was a
that's awesome. And, I think that if you put information out there in a way that sort of filters itself, the people who really need to find you will. And
Mhm,
the people that are just glossing over, they'll do that and probably not waste your time. So it's a good way to go about it.
yeah, yeah.
So
It
tell me
feels
about
like
this book.
yeah, naturally.
Exciting.
Oh, I love this labor of love. I mean, naturally really is the sort of capstone project, the culmination of over a decade, working in herbalism or a lifetime, if we want to look at it that way, my lifetime.
Sure.
Um, and naturally is for anyone who is looking for better health, naturally. It is about herbalism, and anyone who's interested in herbalism will learn plenty. If you're a beginner, if you're a professional, it's all in there. And if you've never even heard of herbalism before, it's also the book for you. It's
Nice.
really about, it includes case studies from my work with clients. It includes history. It includes new science. It includes recipes. It's really meant to, I really strive to make it a literary experience. So you sit down and you can read this book for pleasure and
Nice.
learn a lot along the way. I was really determined to not have it feel like a textbook.
Yeah,
Um,
technical books are hard to read, and for us that research, you just power through it and read it. And then readable books generally don't have a lot of good content that you can use for
exactly.
research. So you're marrying the two together.
I really, really was determined to do that. And I think it speaks to that previous point that I mentioned about making this accessible. I wanted it to be an enjoyable experience. I wanted people to be moved, to be inspired, and also to be, highly educated by the end of the book about what herbalism can do and understand, if I just want to take one step, great. If I want to change my whole life, great. You can do that.
Absolutely.
So I think the other thing that's important to note about the book is that most of the chapters focus on a specific category of herbs because I find categories of herbs to be a very easy way to understand how to navigate the thousands
I
and
can appreciate that a lot. I've read a lot of herbal books, and a lot of them are just alphabetical, and it's just
thousands.
like really. And then you go to the table of contents and you try to find references, and the categories are what you're generally looking for. I'm looking for things that do this,
Yeah.
and A's, B's, and C's. So I think that's a great move you did there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it was the way that I best learned herbs and it's the way that I've taught them. And I think it makes a lot of sense for people when they hear, I've got stress. What are the herbs for stress? That's kind of the
Right.
colloquial way that we speak about them anyway. I need help sleeping. There's a category for that. There's a category for
Exactly.
need states. So
So you start out and you've got these categories of herbs. You talk about the plants, you talk about what they do. Do you talk about how to use them?
I do definitely, yeah. So within each chapter, there's a case study. So I take you through, a client that I had and the exact protocols that I used with that client, and that includes herbs within that category, but it also includes dietary recommendations, lifestyle changes, and then there are specifics in terms of, if I'm talking about lavender, for example, what's the best form to take it in? What's a recommended dosage? And what's even more helpful, I think, for people is at the end of the book, there's a quite a large table, and it's
Nice.
a table of all of the categories of herbs, very easily referenced, quickly. You can just go look at lavender and say, oh, okay, it's best as a, tea, for example, or if I'm going to take a
Sure.
capsule, it's this capsule at this dosage, and here are any safety concerns or notes. You just reference it quickly. So I
Nice.
think that tool, I haven't seen one of those in the industry, and it felt really important for me to include something like that for people who just want a quick
I
check.
like that. I like it when an herbal has sort of two ways to look things up.
Mm,
One would be the uses of this plant, and the other one would be, you know, teas or tinctures or
Mhm.
infusions and plants to use in them, and that gives you two different ways to go about it. So I think
Yeah.
that's a great way to go forward. Um,
Yeah.
I noticed you did mention that things to be aware of as far as like contraindications. I think that's an important piece because people think that, oh, it's an herb, so it's safe, and I can just eat some of it. It's great. Take more, it's better. And then people don't realize that that is absolutely not the case. And some herbs can make you really sick and even worse.
Hi, this is Joe Grumbine, and I wanted to share an update. The platform that hosts this podcast has made some changes to the subscriber settings, and we have a number of subscriber-only episodes that we offer to the supporters, and for a minimum of $3 a month, we can get you signed up. And if you're already signed up and you're having some kind of trouble locating these episodes in the other platforms, I would say maybe the best answer is to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I'm sorry for the hassle. I don't have any way to make a change, but I'm very grateful for all the support. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a great quote. I don't recall. It was another herbalist who wrote this somewhere. She said, just because it's natural doesn't mean you can be as stupid with it as you want to be.
Right. That's a great saying because I know
Well,
people who've damaged their organs by just going too crazy with herbs. It's like they tell you to take 25 milligrams, so they take 2,500, and it's
uh,
just like, no.
yeah, well, I mean, a really easy way to not do that is to take as directed, you know.
Right.
I
Just
think
start there. I always tell
right,
people
right.
to titrate. Start a little less than they tell you and
Yeah.
bump it up a little bit and see how you feel. Take time with it.
Yeah. And I really work hard to ease the fears around the safety with herbs because I think there are so many barriers to entry already
Right.
that concern of their, about their safety is it's overblown. Of course, safety concerns exist, especially if we're taking, 100 times what the recommended
Exactly.
dose
That's
is.
generally where the problems come from.
Yeah, or
Nobody's
poor
going to get sick from a
quality.
cup of tea unless you're, highly allergic to something.
Exactly, exactly. So, I think there are, generally again for the general population, what's available on the market from reputable providers that is high quality, that has a specific, dosage recommendation on the product is not something that we need to be afraid of.
Right.
If anybody is taking medication, of course, you need to check with a healthcare provider. And there are certain herbs that, we need to be especially careful with, but like contraindications within the herbal world. So like herb interactions that are, dangerous are so uncommon.
I
And
think
even,
in reasonable doses, you're probably not going to have any
yeah,
issues.
yeah, of course. So it's something that I like to speak about, of course, but really to try to downplay responsibly, because I think that's actually the truth.
That's
So
the key, really, is the client has to be their own doctor, and the client has to be mindful of what they're doing, and they're the only ones that know themselves and how they feel and what they're doing.
yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. And that reminds me of a related point in terms of, our taking our health into our own hands. There are some recipes in the book as well, but I'm pretty anti-recipe.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is that I really, I've always tried to teach people how to be empowered to think for themselves, to go beyond being told what to do and to learn how to do it on their own. Because we can follow recipes, until the end of time. But if we don't have the right recipe for that thing that happens later on, what are we
Right.
going to do? Have we
Yeah.
learned how to have we learned these plants? Have we learned our bodies in such a way that we can create our own recipe? So I provide recipes, but I provide them as templates, that can be
Nice.
customized and personalized, because also there's a compliance issue if you're like, well, this is the recipe, but I don't like the way this herb tastes.
Right.
Then what do you do?
Something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, I think that's fantastic. I think that ultimately the people that go into this, we all start out with somebody else's recipes and then we start
Exactly.
tweaking on them. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, I see how this works. As a formulator, that's how I learned. I didn't go to
Mhm.
school for it. I just did it. And when I saw that things worked, I kept doing them. And if they didn't work, I did something else.
Formulating is fascinating and so much fun.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's my
It's awesome.
favorite part.
Yeah, mine too. I love to, I just, people are like, oh, this and that. I'm a tinkerer. I just like to tinker with things until I find something that's nice.
Yeah, yeah. And I can understand, if people are starting out, like that's not necessarily how they want to start out. I think
Right.
I think like you, I like to learn about it and then try it.
Yeah,
I did everything sort of on myself first.
absolutely. I'm the first test subject. And if I have an issue with it, then we put off. If I don't, then I got a few close friends that are secondary test subjects and we go from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great way to live, it's that direct experience. And like
Mhm.
we have to, we need to see the plant, taste it, touch it, feel it. You can read about it in a book, you can read about life in a book, but when you try it for yourself, then in a different way. So I like that.
Exactly. Now with herbs, it's kind of a when you're looking at herbs in science, it's kind of a complicated route because you have most herbs contain multiple compounds and you have this entourage effect of multiple compounds. Then you deal with supplements and you're dealing with generally single molecule. And so you have two different elements, and you were talking about, both supplements and herbs. How do you
Mhm.
integrate these two?
Yeah, I definitely use both. I'm a big fan of both.
Me too.
Yeah, but it's a great point, an important point, and actually it reminds me of, the hypothetical person who's taking 100 times the recommended dose.
Right,
That's what happens with supplements. We isolate a compound, concentrate
right,
it, take it that way. And that's, and ironically, there's so much less fear in the market of these supplements than there are of
right.
herbs, right? And
Exactly. You
so
get an
that's
over-the-counter status, and all of a sudden it's just
yeah,
nothing could go wrong. FDA said it's okay.
right on. Yeah. So yeah, I like to work with both. I mean, there are some companies that do some really brilliant formulations that
Mhm.
include the nutraceuticals, as well as the herbs. I love that. I really like to see that actually. I think that excites me and it always has.
Yeah.
And when I'm creating protocols for people, if I want, like, for example, I love amino acids. I find
Oh
them
yeah.
very, easy to work with, wide therapeutic range. So I might, add, and I take those on my own routine as well as a bunch of herbs. So it's really about the best ingredient for the job, but it's typically a plant-based or, an herbal blend. But if
Mhm.
we want to put some
There's a
extra
time and a place for
in
things.
there or
Right.
something, then by all means let's do that.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think when, even if it is extracted or isolated from an animal product, by the time it's a single molecule, I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I mean that could be a like an ethical thing depending on the person, but yeah,
Still
I'm
disclose it, but it seems to me that, if you got the compound, it is the compound wherever it
hmm
came from.
hmm yeah.
So tell me about your practice. I know that, you're talking about clients and whatnot. How do people interact with you personally?
Yeah, well, I have actually retired from private practice
Oh, okay.
after many years and many, many clients and many classes and speaking engagements. So I at this point I do education to wider audiences. So we produce a lot of content. I write a lot. I teach a lot online or speaking engagements, that sort of thing. But I moved away from the private practice around the time that I started writing the book, maybe a little bit
Oh, okay.
before that, just because I wanted to scale a bit. There's
Nice.
so much that you learn when you're working one-on-one with people. But it got to a point where just personally and professionally, I was wanting to branch out. And also, to write a book like this requires an
Oh, yeah, no
incredible amount of
idea.
time.
People have no idea what it takes to write a book. I mean, people are always, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. I'm like, yeah, I have to stop everything else for a long
Everything.
period of time, and I've got things I'm doing. So yeah, it's not everybody can just write a book. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Especially a good one.
Mildly traumatic.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Well,
Yeah.
in all the people that you've worked with, I always like to catch some kind of a profound anecdote that
Mm.
you know doubtedly had some interactions with people that were just amazing, where somebody had a transformation or an epiphany or just some major positive change. What kind of tell me one of the stories that came along your path?
Yeah, there were so many of those. I mean, I can't count the number of times that I, finished with a client and just cried because it was amazing to see
Nice.
their lives, how their lives had changed. Um, and usually, always actually that comes because they eventually took this practice into their own hands and began applying
Nice.
it to their life, more and more broadly. I think the one story that I reference most often, when I'm thinking about these transformations, is one that I included in Naturally. And it's a client. It was one of my very first clients, and we saw each other for years. And she came in with digestive issues, maybe a little bit of weight loss that she was looking to achieve, some fairly minor things. And we ended up working together for years as her health evolved, as she got pregnant, as she, had her children. I ended up seeing her husband as well. But there was this point where, she'd changed her diet, she'd changed her lifestyle, she'd changed her relationship to fitness, all these things. And she comes to me and she says, so this might sound strange, but like, do you think that herbalism could help me start playing the piano again?
Nice.
I used to play the piano and I loved it. It brought me so much joy, but I've lost it now that I have, two kids and I'm really, really busy.
Sure.
And, long story short, yes, she ended up playing the piano again. But the fact
Nice.
that she was thinking that way that was it. It was, this holistic way of thinking and living, um, where can it apply? The answer is it can apply to anything.
Everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
100%. It's
Yeah.
a tool to be used in any way that you need it. And there's something for everybody if you look in the right places for sure.
Yeah. So I loved that story. She was very
Is there
special.
been anybody that you really weren't able to help? And it was probably because of their own, not willingness, but just curious. I mean, there's always that stubborn client that you're just like, I don't know, it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
That's great. This sounds a little bit unlikely, but it is true. There was one person in all of the people that I saw, there was one person who was really struggling to change. It wasn't that they weren't seeing results, but there was a lot of resistance, struggle. And then finally she came back to me and she said, you know what? I realized I don't want to change, even
Nice.
though I
That's
know.
what it always boils down to. That's
Even,
always, yeah, I like the chaos. I like the problem more
yeah.
than I fix
I
it.
know, I know that these things are not healthy for me,
Yeah.
but I've realized that they give me a certain kind of pleasure because I don't have that in this other part of my life. And so I'm going to choose to continue to live the way that I've lived. But, she was helped because she realized that, so
Yeah.
much of this work also resembles therapy. I mean,
Oh, absolutely. It's
yeah.
always, yeah, when somebody wants to get better, then you end up being a therapist no matter what, and you have whatever tools you use. Well, I got a final question. You had mentioned that you'd gone to Peru, done ayahuasca. I've worked with and studied what we call ethnobotanicals for
Mhm.
40 years. And I'm just curious, today there's this resurgence in what they call plant medicine. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people experimenting and using and working with some powerful plant
Yeah.
medicines. What's your thoughts on that?
Mm. Well, I think those plants, those botanicals, are certainly powerful and have the potential to be transformational in the right, contexts. And I think there's an opportunity for them to revolutionize, mental health, the mental health spaces as well. Whether or not that's going to happen is definitely to be seen. And I
Oh,
think
sure.
there's also there are a lot of issues at this point with the tourism
Oh,
related
yeah.
to these retreats and the quote unquote plant medicines. I think they're medicines and they're effective. They're not for everyone. They're not for
Correct.
all the time. And so I think it's really a matter of treating them with great care,
Yes.
respect,
Correct. Yeah.
and maybe not jumping on the bandwagon of it being trendy right now.
Right. Agreed.
So
Yeah.
a lot
I
more to
think
be said
that's
about it, but
good advice. Absolutely. Well, this
yeah.
is the spot where I give you your plug and get to share with us anything that you want to as far as how people can reach you. Obviously, the book, I'm looking forward to seeing this when it comes out. Looks like July 22nd is the launch date.
That is correct. July 22nd, everywhere books are sold. Naturally, The Herbalist Guide to Health and Transformation. Really a book for anyone who is interested in better health naturally, whether that is herbal or not. If you're interested in herbalism, this is the one for you. If you like to read entertaining books where you also learn something, this one is also for you.
Nice.
Meantime, I can be found at RachelleRobinette.com and on Instagram, Rachelle Robinette. We have a free newsletter that we send out herbalism information every week that can be signed up for in either of those places, and that's a great way to kind of get into the scene that I've created over the last decade plus. So
Interesting. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm grateful that you came to join us today, and hopefully we'll come back and talk more.
wonderful. Thanks, Joe.
You bet. This has been the Healthy Living Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Grumbine, and we'll see you next time. This has been another episode of the Healthy Living Podcast. We produce this show so that people can share their stories, people that have overcome obstacles, people that are undergoing obstacles. We're building a community of health-minded individuals. If you're interested in supporting the show, please leave a review on the platform you're listening to it on. If you're interested in becoming a guest, please send an email to itsjoegrumbine@gmail.com, or you can send a note into the notes section of the podcast. All right. Well, thank you for supporting this show, and we hope you've enjoyed it.